Hey there, it's Keith Hayden, the digital novelist, and today I have a special treat for you. I'm going to be going through the first part of my brother's book, Genevieve of Venus, and I'm going to be pointing out some things that I found interesting in this book that you can use if you're writing your own novel to spice things up, to expand your world. It's all about shrinking huge ideas into emotional characters and beats. So let's get right into it. The first chapter is called, the first chapter is actually chapter 174. I told him that was cool. Maybe on burning winds. It starts like this. We're in the year 2770, so we're in far, far future, right? Winter 47, 2770 NE. Zeta observed with a pensive gaze through the high glass windows of her office at Miranda headquarters, San Jose dos Campos, Brazil. Now the lone representative of the original soul group that had pioneered the great work, she recalled, with some aversion, the surreal sight of a dimming eye band as her longtime friend and colleague, Cyclops, finally faced his chosen shutdown time 1 year prior. It was a personal decision. The nearly 700-year-old cyborg had declared. At a relatively calm time in humanity's history, free of wars, interplanetary strife, or urgent social issues, Cyclops' original personality had by then persisted for centuries on the solid foundation of Miranda's founders. As the founders had, he too now wished to achieve a kind of transpersonal realization, figuring that a natural passing at the end of one's resonance window with the realm he occupied would be most in line with the easy peace that described the most contented livers of life. Zeta would cry that day with a sorrow that she hadn't felt since her wife's passing over 350 years ago. Tears she had been able to contain upon losing her first father figure decades before that. The cycling of Cyclops rang with a familiarity that reminded her of Aldo once again, though the difference between losing someone after 18 years and losing them after 420 years was a stark one indeed. And you can see how the first paragraph, that whole first chunk, was one paragraph. And you can see it right here. And in that paragraph, we start big picture. We're talking about the world and social issues, and 700 years of time has already, we're already glimpsing that here. But taking the cosmic and zooming in onto a particular character, this Zeta, and her grief over her friend, this Cyclops, who sounds like Cyclops is a robot, and I'm pretty sure it is. I think my brother told me he was. Um, but yeah, this guy is basically electing to die, and it gives us that emotional beat. So that's a hint right there, a trick you can use when you're wanting to take something super abstract and big and then shrinking it down into an actual character. It's a great technique. Let's continue. It must have been a right with her group mates, choosing mortality nearly every time over the machine merged stretch of quasi-eternal life. But choose this they had. So many wonderful and brilliant souls, from Hall all the way through Epera, had helped make this existence what it was now. This world in which humans and apes alike once struggled. It had been transformed into heaven itself, as nearly every source of existential pathology had been steadily sublimated into the worlds of sports, games, and the creative arts. Yes, there were still crimes. Yes, there were misunderstandings. But for most people living in the 28th century, every day was a golf day. When Phaedra's colleagues Tippy, Kubrina, Raelio, and Apera finally succeeded in surfacing the Venusians, they immediately set out to protect the burning planet against their fellow humans' well-known thirst for new territory. The publicly sourced work for translating the first of what were now 4 other dimensionals, or paces, began in breakneck urgency within Miranda, and almost statesmanlike diplomacy everywhere else. As administrators over the worlds and, by extension, the whole solar system's interactional repository, Cyclops and Phaedra Zeta found an easy case for reciprocity among the United Solar Council and other groups. If we let Venus mutate into a human outpost, we will have said all we need to about the correctability of our own imperialism, Cyclops admonished. We will plant. I didn't know that was Cyclops talking. We will plant our own civilization on top of the thing we have just discovered, effectively throwing away an entire dimension just so we can continue spreading the same disturbances we already have. The issue was less about conquering yet another land, since the Nusians were then, and still remain in 2770, invisible to humans without scanners. It was more about whether humanity itself could resist the urge to force its will unnaturally, often catastrophically, upon new frames. Failure to curb this urge would mean, among the now greatly wizened humans, that we would lose our first and last chance to truly serve as stewards for even higher levels of existence. We would also be admitting that warring imperialism remained preferable to evolved, perfected exchange. If ever a group of 300 or so humans had a shot at bringing all 24 billion into enlightenment as a race, this was it. We didn't create Venus the way we did the Digi and Com virtual dimensions. We translated its atmosphere's interactions into our own story-based language. Will we be petty and savage as the Olympian gods placed their own trifles upon us? Or will we interact from afar as spirits and benefactors? Keep in mind that the former is expensive, egoic, and conducive to nothing that millennia of subjugation haven't already shown. The latter gives us options. Lots of good options. The argument given to the United Solar Council by Cyclops wouldn't have made any sense back in the 24th century, Phaedra reflected. So one of the other things that is cool about my brother's work is that he often uses different fonts to describe different people's thoughts and dialogue. So you can see here that with Phaedra's dialogue here, let's see if we get it right there. You can see it's a completely different font than the rest of the text. So this isn't a technique that I've really used. I mean, I often use other languages, but yeah, I thought this was cool just to make things stand out, because he told me that he's not a big fan of just standard quotation marks or then he said or dialogue tags and things like that. So it's just a different way to differentiate your dialogue. Pretty cool. Alas, the council itself was 70% beta, or cyborg, and only 30% biological human. As mostly ions, I-Y-O-H-N-S, ions, with no natural interest in the apisms of old, the human council of the 27th century got their fellow cyborg Cyclops' message immediately. Sure, it was cliché, but the statement never got old. Thank God for the betas. Throughout the 21st century, we were still natural borns. Then we started putting generation passable mods into our genes, calling our mixed selves machina. The machina and natural borns together would later constitute Homo sapiens alpha, or bions. Gradually, our artificial human machine people gained the technological maturity to join us in mainstream society. These were called Homo sapiens beta. Finally, after 2 centuries of struggle against our own prejudices, sufficiently human-like cyborgs were counted as the 4th humanity, Homo sapiens delta. This occurred around the same time as the technology for the bion-ion mating was perfected, allowing any 2 partners from any of the 4 humanities to successfully have children together. Here, nearly all paths led to machina babies. The reasons for this might be obvious. As the betas rose to positions of public influence, they proved wiser, more peaceful, far less money or ego-driven, and far more inclined towards rich, accurate information as their lifeblood. That we could even produce something like the betas, over and beyond the path that the early AI makers were taking, could be attributed to a major shift in our attention to programming free will. You had to make a machine that stopped wanting to be treated like a machine. You had to let it have a private life. You had to program some inner system known only to itself, which served as the clock, the virtual genetic mandate, the source of hunger and survival, for dictating its own personally sourced desires. Now in the year 2770, North Earth Hemispheric Standard, NE, the legal definition of a human rested upon a definition of autoanthrotypic action. Ooh, that's a mouthful. Autoanthrotypic action. There it is. Be you a pregnant man or a four-armed prosthetic natural-born tri-trans, human-like priorities without help from others' clicks, commands, or button presses was the name of the game. The more Phaedra reflected on this, the greater the sense of serenity that filled her thoughts. Cyclops hadn't wanted immortality any more than she would. 700 years is a long time to watch a chain of naturally 70-year-old maxers play out its story. But what a story it had been. Truly, if not for the work of Phaedra's soul group mates, people like Cyclops, Twice Jack, and Kubrina A, built ultimately upon the people 300 years before them, Ezra Hall, Michelle Golden, Cassandra Engels, the original lab called Space-Time and its offspring Miranda mapping would never have been formed. How drastically a handful of people had changed humanity simply by changing what a few more people thought worth pursuing. For Cyclops to know his time, just like Aldo, would be considered remarkable to people back in the original space-time days. Yet some wisdom in the sky continually looked upon the beauty of life and death, knowing that it was precisely this which our truest minds had sought and succeeded in emulating. Phaedra moved easily into the balcony garden. So here I wanted to stop and comment on a technique because this is, as you can see, this is a very dense passage. We're getting a ton of world building, stuff about the world, the different human races, just the way the society in this book is set up. But it's all filtered through this character, Phaedra, Zeta, same character, through her memory. And that's a way to do it, like instead of just doing a lore dump, which this can feel like it is, but then we end up in a character's mind and says Phaedra's reflecting on this, thinking about this, and then we go back to the physicality. Okay, now the character's doing things. I would chunk this down a little bit more. I would shred it out and maybe split it up a little bit more so it isn't so heavy, especially right at the beginning of the book. But it's still a great way to bring it back down and make it human. So consider that technique when you're wanting to include a lot of lore or world building. At its core, the technology arising... Okay, we're good. I just wanted to make sure, checking the time. At its core, the technology arising out of space-time mapped everything as frequencies and remapped most non-noisy frequencies into stories of familiar things. No one would have guessed that, among all recent inventions, stick play, in quotes, would be consistently cited in the top 20 as one of the greatest. The late 2000s technology for translating text directly into stick figure actions had been conceived of by some arrogant guy, but fueled its immediate creation by an upstart AI company. Spacetime itself had had several run-ins with big and dangerous organizations, mind control technology being the brainchild of one of its scheming bosses, who was then out-schemed by an even more cunning government agent. Zeta's own evolution had occurred against a chain of delinquent personalities, including a certain drug-addicted colleague. Finally, there was that last group, a commander on a slaughter mission, a self-printed data save who craved significance. This beautiful world had been built in no small part upon the deeds of individuals who would have considered bad. Indeed, history had ensured this in ensured that had ensured this in the case of Cassidy Black, Vladimir Putin, and Dynamine V. Kozori. Okay, these are names, and I recognize Vladimir Putin, of course, but the others I haven't heard of. V's case was even more unfortunate because she really should have remained a nobody in the greater space of history. But because natural-born Bion Phaedra P. Imkiner had been moved into the ion cyber body she now occupied as Phaedra Zeta, because she had done so as the next phase of the centuries-long chain of Miranda incarnates, because of her and Cyclops' access to the entire field of multidimensional jumping since the field's inception, and because Cyclops himself was personality trained solely on Hall, Golden, Ingalls, and Naren's data, she had been destined for goddess status from the beginning. Anyone who was significant in her history would at least be as partly public as she was. Thus, Dynamine, long irrelevant in Phaedra's life, nonetheless remained the Judas to her Jesus in the common mind. How sad for her. How very sad. Now, although no one else from the Miranda Soul group besides Phaedra remained in the world as of 2770, the essence of the group's members lingered over the known solar system as would an atmosphere charged with the glow of galaxies' worth of microscopic Buddhas. Microscopic Buddhas. Whoa. The old human distrust now yielded to a golden attraction of the unexplored. The old inadequacies born of social pressure now lie replaced by a Naren, Naren sounds right. Narayan. Naren resistance to the forefathers' punishments. Those born into seemingly hopeless spaces now had the system of Ingalls to drip enough grants with a Z, Grantz, through their parents' devices to ensure their protection by the world itself long before they reached the age of 3. If the all-seeing system of interplanetary data monitoring could predict all things, then it could also be said to allow most things, unless called upon by the good to do otherwise. The preservation of free will, including its own, could never be taken for granted. It was this that created an essential utopia for the disturbed world of the early 2000s. Still, some men were born evil, and most normal Bions were still inclined to follow those evil men out of sheer animal attention. For these people, there was always calm and Digi, a communicative and digital metaverse respectively. Each of these universes rested upon the endless juxtaposition of contrary concepts. Over the past 300 years, people like Phaedra and other leaders of the world order had worked to steadily infuse the unit of emotional capital, LA, that's E-L and capital A. Man, some of these names in here, I'm struggling with these. With the kind of all-determining power to grant access to that material credits, C-R-Y-D-I-T-S, credits? Yeah, I'm not sure. Dollars once had. So I guess the credits are like currency in this world. Through years of friendly, benevolent, highly passive practices, the Solar Council and its allies had effectively cleaned up the Wild West of humanity in the same way that early Google had made the information world feel safe again by simply being minimalistically colorful. So although you could commit crimes in the normal world, which was called Astra, you absolutely had to make sure nobody saw you. Not your victim, not your watch, not the traffic AI, Not that pocket-sized M-him, M-him, E-M-I-E-M-H-I-M. Man, I should be marking these words. They're going to come back and bite me in the ass later. M-him pulse reader installed in every back alley in Chicago, snitching to the authorities whenever elevated stress was detected within 90 feet of the device. You get the idea. Just as almost all land and water in the world had come to be owned by someone somewhere, all public spaces, especially the fun ones, could be considered monitored by someone somewhere. Your thoughts might be yours, but that gathering place for your delinquent friends certainly was not. If you lived in the 2000s, a person from the 2700s might ask you to consider the kinds of things people could get away with back in the 1300s. Setting neighbors on fire, grabbing a few friends to tear the walls off of an enemy's house, murdering someone for loot, having things like kings. Clearly, the rules might have been expected to change over the course of 700 years. As of the mid-26th century, 4 biological sexes, for example, male, female, trans, and nons, were understood to be the mating forms. The last 2 came automatically with cyborg citizenship. The death penalty was no longer used by anyone but vigilantes, and even then, only illegally, the practice having grown to be seen in the same light as foot binding. On the subject of the feet, yet still related to issues of the law, the world of 28th century perceptual dynamics found its roots strongly in the field of frequentics. Frequentics. Okay, I just want to make sure I read that right. At the roots of all natural science lay math, then frequentics, then physics, then chemistry, then geology, then microbiology, followed by biology as we had come to know it. In that order. Math and variables could be used to model almost everything, while frequentics allowed people to represent objects and concepts as spaces of different maths. From a frequentic perspective, legs, be they located on men, mice, or centipedes, represented a cycling interface which scrolled worlds past their bearers. This made them similar to ambient force fields and rigid body dynamics, or currents in rivers. To study the legs frequentically was to study them for the collections of forces they most closely approximated. To know how and when creatures used them was to gain a piece of the bigger set of assumptions made by the creature in navigating its world. But this approach to bodily action had major implications in society now run overwhelmingly by machines. To punish bodily crimes meant little if the creature yet lived to commit its crimes in new ways. No optimization was the better solution. Optimization was the better solution. Rather than locking up the body for the sins of the foot section, the chiefs of the New World Order supported digiversal rehab. No need to sit uselessly in a cell when you could sit actively in a holodeck expressly designed to teach you better. So this is a new form of prison in this world, where it sounds like you're constantly moving because your legs are being forced to move, or things are being forced to scroll past you or something like that. Let's see if there's more. Accordingly, the prisons of the 2700s worked something like non-voluntary video game censors. Oh, here we go. If you were sent to one, you were well advised to master the games assigned to you. The career field of prison game generation, however, represented a true coup d'etat in criminal justice. For prison games were nothing more than regular life scenarios pinned by morally positive writers and rhetoric-ware. R-H-E-T-A-W-A-R-E. I'm not making this up, y'all. This stuff is here. So I'm struggling with it. These are words that are clearly conceived, but I'm like, I've never seen these before. And then there's /Redaware. R-E-D-A-W-A-R-E. Okay, there's going to be a spelling test after this video, so make sure you spell it right in the comments. The worse your crime, the more difficult the life situation you'd find yourself in for longer. Truly heinous crimes earned more sadistic writers. At least in 2770, writers have something interesting to do, right? Besides just write story. You can write prison scenarios for prisoners. That's a cool job. Uh, such was the truly heinous crimes earned more sadistic writers. Such was the love child of mental time travel or jump technology with the body and mind steering of the frequency based compulsion technology called grants. That's here we are. GRANTZ. That's the grants. I mentioned it once earlier. Now we've explained it. It's like the technology that allows you to control people through writing, through frequencies in this world. A 20th century prisoner knew full well that his very real perception of reality was nothing more than an endless movie sponsored by the law. His physical body put in stasis while his psychology played out its lessons in calm and digi. He might he might be expected to remain there on average for 2 real-time years until the bad habit was voluntarily shaken. For those clever enough to live rudely without ever being charged for it, the 7 billion betas in the world were designed to detect subtle signals and act accordingly. Referencing you against the system's probabilities, everyone could see that you were a betrayer of your fellow man. The trust was withheld. The emotional capital, LA, ELA, again, denied. And you essentially fell from heaven in a shower of locked doors. With a 2770 Earth population of about 9 billion, the betas overwhelmingly ran the planet, constituting over 7 billion of us. With nowhere to go on their own home planet, most alpha bions, almost all machina, either defected to the violence of places like Jupiter and killed each other there in stupid ways, succumbed to a long and brutal 26th century text sourced environmental pathogens, or found their own digital corners in the stasis of permanent digi. The machina, formerly us, with mods, remember, had proved unworthy to run their own worlds, so it became common practice to simply plug into an interface and let the simulations write most parts of your story for you. The Matrix, essentially. In this way, except you're voluntarily plugging in, because, I mean, and that's a pretty slick commentary on, how you log online, get on your smartphone, how often do you jack in, where was I? So it became part of your story. In this way, you might escape a place where you had no worth in favor of a place not run by machines. Most machina held a generic contempt for their ion masters, yet recognized that going back to the blissfully ignorant past was not only impossible, but undesirable. The meta-universes promised a stake on every table, a government surplus check in every mailbox, while the keepers of the New Order, people like Phaedra, were more than happy to lose 6 billion stressed humans in a mere 2 centuries. Mortality would catch up with everyone, sooner or later. Even Cyclops. Even her. So I wanted to stop there. This was one of those parts where I had flagged to stop and talk about it a little bit, because we get this line that's basically like mortality. Even though we have this world with all these different races and all these different types of humans, and we've learned about the justice system and all these things, it's like it doesn't matter in the end. Even though we're in this super futuristic world, death is the universal truth. And plugging those universal truths into, even with all of this dense world building at the beginning of this novel, you always want to do that in some way, whether it's overt like this or signaling to it in some way. It depends on how you want to do it. I prefer to do it a little more subtly, but here it's very, we have this philosophical line. Like, it's something that everybody knows, but most of us don't acknowledge on a daily basis. So it's a good reminder. As the 21st century yielded to the 22nd, psychological capital, psi, came to replace O dollars. O as in OWE. Like you owe somebody something. O/dollars as the hot commodity among skilled humans. By that time, most people did not have much disposable O to pay for their non-essentials. But Oh, okay, I got to call just now. Okay, they gave up. Where was I? Did not have much disposable to pay for non essentials, but found that bartering for the best thing yielded much better returns. Although it might be said that the invention of blockchain exchanges turned out to be one of the biggest lumps of coal the proletariat had ever gotten a whiff of, making the rich not only richer but complicatedly so, the technology did generate valuable platforms for piecemeal skill cluster building as non early adopters stopped hogging the GPUs and started making simpler systems for the common broke man to use. NFTs stopped being about Uber chess players moving $50,000 slivers of non reality among their own and started being about two people trading a work for service, a vouch for a contract. On the chain, the last of the four capital types, social mu, eventually began trading in measurable ways 300 years later as virtual world owners sought a way to move specific digital citizens among their platforms while still respecting the networks of relationships involved. That last part was the key. The reason it had become unacceptable to bind the bodies of criminals in the 20th century lie in the idea that most animal kingdoms, most virtual worlds, most good stories, and most evolving artworks demanded their villains. Villains who wanted the right to kill someone who pissed them off. In the order which Phaedra and Cyclops had helped create, a person who consistently broke the golden rule soon found himself L and mu broke. So, broke of emotional capital and social capital. For every beta and every data linker plugged into the system knew for every beta and every data linker plugged into the system knew he was no good. Yet he still deserved a place with the billions of other humans still guided by their inner animal. If you couldn't make it in this world, there was still great value to be had in moving your consciousness into others. Value not just for you, but for the transferer and receiving administrators who moved you. The late great Solar Council jurist Arcano Meseric, a 27th century natural born, prior to becoming a justice, once responded to a newly convicted serial killer in court. When asked by the four-time killer if the death penalty was to be applied, Meseric answered with the following: "Do you think you deserve the death penalty?" "I do." "Why?" "Because I'll do it again." "Not if you are sentenced to life." "Your systems will let me out, and you know it, Judge." "You're right. But in sentencing you, our society merely throws you away without learning to help people before they become you. People who, perhaps, won't do it again. Tell me, do you believe there is a way to put your crimes to good use for the greater good?" "No, I don't. I'm a bad egg." "Maybe you are. But perhaps the court would not be satisfied with simply sweeping your reasons under the rug. These are new times, Mr. Glee. There are whole spaces where your perspective may enlighten those who seek to make the world better." Oh, I like this, Judge. So I wanted to stop there, and that's where I flagged the end of this reading. But I like that because, and my brother's good at this. He uses it often in a lot of his books. These kind of dialogue sparring matches where it's basically two characters in this philosophical debate, but through like regular plain dialogue. And then the setup is, a judge to a killer. And so we already have like this power. We know what the power balance is. And the killer's he's already in court. And so he uses that to frame these philosophical debates. So that's all for this reading of Genevieve of Venus. It is a very, as you can see, just from the first 10 pages, that was only 10 pages. It is a very, very dense read, and it's pretty long too. I think it's near 700 pages, y'all. But there's a lot of ideas about future societies, and I know my brother, he's all about trying to make the world better, and so that's why he put this novel out. So if you are interested in reading more of this novel, then check out the link in the description. I'll have a link to where you can get your hands on it. But that's going to do it for this week's community read. What did you think of this? I've also been doing editing. So if you take a look at a link in the description, go to my website, keithhayden.net. You can join my email list. And there, if you are a new novelist or you're writing stories, fiction, then I'd love to read your stuff. I do this every week where I read other people's stuff. It's my way of participating and giving back to the community of writers and just seeing more people, just encouraging more people to write and tell their stories. As you can see, a work like this is something that, HarperCollins and Penguin, it's too hot to handle. They can't handle this. So maybe your story is like that too. Maybe you've got some ideas or some crazy characters or some taboo subjects that you're writing and want to talk about. I love it. I want to read it. So hit me up in the comments what you thought about this, about all the crazy words that I probably mispronounced, that I'm going to hear it from my brother. Be like, no, this name is pronounced like this. It's not Naren, it's Narayan or Narayan. Fuck, I don't know. It's not $O, it's $O. I'm joking, man. Don't get mad. All right, y'all. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.